So this particular webinar is funded through the Just Fashion project, which is a European Horizon Europe project. Please remain muted. This research is based, or the webinar is based on research by my colleagues Virginia, Lillian, and myself, but we are not lawyers. So any action that you take as a result of this webinar is at your own, on your own basis. We will not be providing the PowerPoints, but we will be sharing a link to the presentation. And again, please, can you remain muted? I don't prefer not to keep repeating that throughout. So without further ado.
Sorry, Martin, I think by mistake you got muted.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine.
So did that, sorry, Virginia, did that just happen?
It just happened, but
yeah,
it's
okay. Yeah, it's some technical challenges at my end. So we will be sharing again the presentation, but not the PowerPoints directly. So and please put any comments or questions in the chat. And if they are questions, please can you write short, succinct questions and not something that requires a lot of interpretation, because we physically won't have the time to go through that. So short, succinct questions would be great. Okay, so I think that's all the procedure done. So I'll start to move into the presentation. And again, my team, if something odd happens, like the mic goes off again, please just shout out and tell me. Right. So as I mentioned, this particular webinar is being delivered via the Just Fashion project, which is a European-wide project led by University of Antwerp, where we are a partner. And in that project, we're bringing our quite extensive experience around regulation and standards around sort of product circularity. And that's our specific role in this particular project. There are other elements within the project, all of which, of course, are very interesting, like circular business models and pilot projects, etc. But just Google on Just Fashion, and you should be able to find out more about the different elements of that, or you can email ourselves or colleagues to follow up on that. So regulations and context. So the first Circular Economy Action Plan in 2015 laid the grounds for a lot of the circularity developments in that has emerged from Brussels since then. The next significant developments were the EU Green Deal in 2019, and within that, this has set up the second Circular Economy Action Plan that set up the basis for the Eco-Design for Sustainable Product regulations, and also the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. And similarly, it also has set up more recently and put in place, a policy framework for a Critical Raw Materials Act that perhaps links more to do the electronic sector and the 30 plus critical raw materials, particularly to do with technology, but also there is a Circular Economy Act that is expected in 2026 that may well impact on the sector. So the Circular Economy Action Plan 2 in 2020 really sets the basis for a significant shift from eco-design regulations primarily focused on the electronic sector through the Eco-Design Directive, so about 30 or 40 different product categories, so primarily focused on energy-related products and focused on reducing energy consumption. The Circular Economy Action Plan set the basis for significant change where there was a much more significant proposal to broaden out by product category, and to make sustainable products the norm in Europe. And importantly for this particular call, textiles as a sector who weren't previously covered under the relevant legislation that had previously covered electronics, automotive, and packaging, was brought into the discussion as one of the key sectors. And before I delve deeper into the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, I'll just briefly mention the Circular Economy Act that is presently out for consultation until November 2025. There is a significant focus on and highlighting of e-waste issues as a significant problematic waste stream, but really it's more broadly to reinforce the single market for waste and secondary raw materials. And clearly there are issues and challenges related to textiles in its various forms. So I wouldn't be surprised that it's a topic that emerges out of this particular piece of regulation. The other key element that came out of the Circular Economy Action Plan 2.0, if you like, was the EU strategy for circular and sustainable circular textiles, which essentially set the basis for a lot of the activities that are starting to flow, that are flow targeting the textile sector. It was, however, a non-binding document and more of a sort of strategic document that has set the basis for a number of different areas where textiles and clothing will feature as a product category. The Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulations, but there are other regulations that we are not covering in this webinar, but we will cover in other webinars that there are big implications for the sector. So the very recent revision of the Waste Framework Directive that is effectively going to bring in mandatory extended producer responsibility for the clothing and fashion sector. At the moment, France and the Netherlands have national regulations, but there isn't a mandatory scheme for the EU, but that is now going to be moving forward. And topics like the green claims regulations that are very relevant for the sector, given some of the challenges the sector has had previously in terms of greenwashing and being called out in a variety of reports as one of the highest metaphorical offenders in terms of greenwashing effectively. So there's a stack of different regulations outside the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation that really, particularly if you are a player in the sector, you'll need to keep an eye on going forward. So moving swiftly now into the ESPR. So ESPR came in on the 18th of July. It is a framework directive, importantly, so it sets the framework up for a series of potential regulatory developments. And the key point there, as I mentioned earlier, it really builds on the eco-design regulation that primarily focused on energy-related products and reducing energy consumption. So the goals are, and I'm not going to read these all out, but really to shift, away from a linear to circular economy, to broaden out particularly the product scope for the regulations, and also empower consumers and businesses to develop more transparent and reliable data. So in summary, it's an expanded scope, new product sectors, new requirements, and I'll come on to that. So effectively, it's moving from potentially 1 to potentially 16 different product requirements that legislators or policymakers will be able to select from to align with different regulations. There are horizontal approaches emerging, for example, There is across all the sectors where regulations may occur. Repairability is going to be an important topic, and there's going to be an increased focus on product information. So the ESPR has 5 core elements to it. There are product regulations or delegated acts, that align to eco-design requirements, digital product passport, a ban on destruction of unsold goods, green public procurement, substances of concern. So these 5 key elements make up that framework directive, and there is the potential for regulations in all of those areas. Some of those are more specific at the moment than others. So within the process for ESPR development, there is, particularly if we're focusing on the first element, the product regulations, there is activity happening in the JRC and the Commission, who are researching and in effect developing the regulations. Then what follows from that is a work plan, then specific product specific and horizontal requirements, and that's sort of summarized within an overall preparatory study that has a lifespan. At present, the preparatory studies for the core sectors that are being focused on are slated at 1 to 2 years, but I think the timescales of that may be extending. So within the process, once those preparatory studies are developed and there are proposals to regulation, that then goes to something called the consultation forum or eco-design forum that then provides feedback, and there's some sort of feedbacks loops on the proposed regulation before the adoption of the regulation and the application of the regulation. So the Eco-Design Forum is an important part of the process, and it includes a number of different experts that indeed review regulatory developments, but also the working plans and feed back into that regulatory process. So it's quite a large group, a couple of hundred people from different stakeholder groups. And the first meeting was held back in February. A second meeting may well have been held. So effectively, eco-design for ESPR's eco-design requirements basically focus on performance requirements, minimal, maximum levels of performance against different performance criteria, and information requirements. And those information requirements will align to the digital product passport, substances of concern, labels, etc. And then performance requirements will be drawn from product parameters that are highlighted in Annex 1 of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulations. And some of those will be quantitative and some of those will be qualitative. So there is still some of those parameters where the specific measurement approach is unclear. So these are the different product requirements or eco-design requirements. So again, going back to what I had mentioned previously about why this is very significant, is the previous eco-design regulation that focused on energy-related products really only focused on energy use and energy efficiency. So it really focused on one criteria. But this is these regulations are broadening out to a much more significant suite or smorgasbord, if you like, of different requirements that regulators can draw from. And the other key element to this is that it is stated in the regulation, in the framework regulation, that repairability will be across considered within all products, and slightly strangely under horizontal measures recyclability and recycled content of electrical and electronic equipment is deemed to be a horizontal measure. So that one could read that actually as quite a specific vertical requirement, but maybe you could read it that there will be elements related to recyclability and recycled content where you have electronics embedded in different products. So, for example, and I'll come into the relevance of this, where you have maybe wearable clothing and technologies. So there is a time scale for this, and again, I won't go through each element of this because you will have access to the recording and a link after, and you can study this. The key elements to this are that there was designated to be the publication of the specific details for the digital product passport that I'll come on to in a short while, but that is likely to be delayed to 2026. And the details of the regulations for the two highest priority sectors, which are textiles and steel, are likely to be announced next year, unless in 2026, unless there are further delays, and regulations likely to come into place at sort of ground level, if you like, in 27, 28. So key element to look at and keep an eye on is the working plan. Within the working plan, which was published in April, it really highlights a lot of the core issues related to how the ESPR is going to be implemented. There has been recent consultation related to ESPR around a new potential product label linked to ESPR that is potentially will bring in wider, criteria than, for example, energy labels. So this process has just been concluded a few days ago. So specifically going into the product regulations, component of the ESPR framework directive. So, and I guess most of you on the call will be aware that textiles is, with iron and steel, is the regulation or the product category and regulatory area that has been chosen to be fast tracked. And there is a whole study as to why they chose the ranked different product categories that we haven't got time to go into today. So there's very detailed reports about the whole methodology where these sectors were chosen. But, for the purposes of today, textiles and apparel is right front and center. And, why this is also important is the sector has never really faced these sorts of regulations previously. The sector has really regulated itself under voluntary agreements, code of conduct, manifestos, all sorts of initiatives, but these have not been regulatory measures. So this is going to be a significant, has some significant implications for the sector. There are product exclusions as stated here, but I won't dwell any time on that. So again, as highlighted, the textiles is included because of high improvement potential, large significant unit sales throughout Europe, and major environmental impact across different environmental criteria. So the Commission's Joint Research Centre has been driving forward a lot of work behind the scenes, preparing and researching and developing the different aspects that will relate to the product regulations, but also will influence, for example, green public procurement and eco-design revisions for textiles. There are a number of products that they have decided are in scope for the particular study that will form the basis for regulations. And as we understand it, particularly those products in scope will have very high textile fiber content. So there are other items, however, that have been excluded. So footwear, contrary to the initial discussions, has been separated out as a separate category and not deemed to be within textiles, as we understand it. So where are we now in terms of the JRC developments? As we understand it, they are now currently at task 5, where they're reviewing a series of different base case studies, where they're reviewing and analysing and trying to understand a lot of the key issues from an environmental and economic perspective through the use of, for example, LCA and life cycle costing model. So there's some detailed work going on understanding environmental and economic impacts of particular case products. What we then move into is stage 6, which is looking at the sort of design options in relation to potential policy and different policy scenarios. So as we understand it, as I stated there, there is this sort of environmental economic analysis going on at the moment. There will be an impact of the design options next year's, with a view to a publication of a delegated act next year, and potentially as early as mid-2027, there may well be regulation on the ground. So again, contrary to what people may be picking up from Brussels, as we understand it, yes, there is a lot of activity happening going on in certain areas to slow policy and to lengthen scenarios for policy implementation. But as we understand it, this is not impacting on the product regulations, particularly for textiles. So we understand that is still progressing. However, there are, as we understand it, delays. So moving on to the next area, digital product passport. Again, one of the 5 components of the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products framework regulation. So there is a definition of digital DPP within the content in the regulation. But one thing that I should perhaps make very clear is there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation around digital product passport, a lot of misunderstanding, and that's very rife for what we're picking up with in a number of SMEs and particularly in supply chains. At the moment, EC, digital product passport, has not been fully announced. There is no specific regulatory measure that has specifically highlighted what is going to go into a digital product passport. So that regulatory part for what I will call ECDPP has not yet been announced, and as we understand it, will be delayed to 2026. There are, however, as we understand it, over 100 digital product passport European funded projects, and there will be other projects around the world, many of them who are claiming they have the answer to digital product passport. I'm sure many of these have done a lot of great research and have a lot of tools and techniques, but by following those particular projects and those recommendations, you cannot guarantee you'll be in compliance with the EC digital product passport because it has not been announced yet. Indeed, there is also many tools and techniques that are using the term digital product passport that are sort of voluntary tools that are digital backed, maybe using QR codes. There is activity going on to collect supply chain product circularity, supply chain data, but at the moment that is possibly sensible to do in preparation for the EC digital product passport, but that will not necessarily mean you will be compliant. There are also many consultants out there who are claiming that they can provide DPP compliance services, but that to me would be a red flag because it says they don't understand the regulations, in that the regulations have not been passed. So I just would like to make that sort of key point before we start. We'll also be holding another particular webinar on this area in the future. Now, also another key element of the digital product passport, again indicating it's still work in progress, is that, and I'll read it directly here from the, so this is text from the ESPR working plan. The information to be collected and made available in a digital product passport will be specified in product-specific delegated acts under ESPR and possibly under other legislation where applicable. So the implication of that is that there will be, some text, for example, in the delegated acts for textiles, so specific text incorporated in that regulation, or there may be other regulation to accompany the textiles regulation that aligns to that sector. So again, this is another implication in terms of anybody highlighting compliance services for EC DPP, I would be personally very wary of. So this is just a little bit more detail, but we haven't got time to go into this. There has been various consultations. Again, particularly the Commission completed a consultation around suppliers, of DPP services, and trying to understand more effectively and develop a better functioning system in relation to suppliers of DPP services. And indeed, there was, I believe, over 250 responses, highest nearly, 40% from Germany and Belgium. But, there was a significant engagement with the Commission's DPP consultation process. So this was much more about perhaps the certification and consultancy side of this. There are 4 surveys that were concluded in August around DPP in relation to impact assessment. And again, these were distributed to a whole range of stakeholders. Perhaps many of you might have been consulted on this. And this was to better understand the potential costs and impacts of DPP and to assess the feasibility of a certification scheme to ensure compliance. There are some indications in some documents, in some discussions, although this is speculation by me. So again, it goes back to the point, we are not, lawyers. So any action you take as a result of anything we say in this webinar is at your own, your own auspices. So there are some indications that there may be schemes set up that verify suppliers for DPP services at a national member state level, and there'll be a process for organisations to comply to be registered on those systems. Although that is discussion we have heard, but others may have better information on that. Also importantly, there's a whole raft of standardization activity happening around digital product passport. And again, one of the key things, as wearing my other hat as the head of Circular Economy Committee for British Standards Institute, there will be a key need increasingly to get terminology and definitions agreed, perhaps not just at a European basis, but at a global basis, because of the nature of international supply chains and the nature of information flow across supply chains. So again, I'm not going to have time to go into great details on this, but there's a very active SEN group that is focused much more on the information architecture for digital product passports. Excuse me. So again, I highlight again, whilst there isn't specific regulations as to what is going to go into a digital product passport, there is a very active European standards group looking at all of the aspects of the information architecture for digital product passports. So again, if you're interested in that area, contact your national standardization body. If you're within Europe, there are a lot of inquiries, as we understand it's now coming from outside Europe to get it to engage, particularly in this particular group. But within the European standards process, that doesn't allow for external non-European partners to engage in the process. So again, this is again live issue, how to include representations from the supply chain, particularly in textiles. So again, there is different working groups. There's over 200 experts, I understand, involved in this. There is also a technical committee called ISO-TC 154, very well established, much more to do with data interchange, much broader, that have then set up some activity around digital product passports. And again, other ISO and IEC activity emerging around digital product passports. And also very recently, there's a joint proposal by ISO and IEC to set up an international digital product passport technical committee that is out for discussion, and a discussion literally very recently circulated. Also, China is now developing its own DPP standards that are due to come out by the end of 2025. We are not aware of what's happening in India or Bangladesh or other key supplier countries, or Turkey, for example. I will try and more swiftly move through these slides for time. The other key components of the ESPR are potential ban on the disruption of unsold goods, and this is primarily due to increased transparency around unsold products. Whilst it's generic like DPP, this is particularly relevant for textiles and clothing. It is due to apply primarily to large companies, and then from July 2026, and then to medium-sized companies by 2030, and there's potentially exemptions for SMEs. There are different elements to this: an implementing act and a delegated act. And there is a consultation period regarding the implementing act that closed on the 10th of July, and the Commission expects adoption later this year. So, as we understand it, there is still this particular regulation is moving forward. Similarly, there will be related regulations that will also tackle potential exemptions. Green public procurement. For many years, 20 years, there's been discussion around different approaches to take forward green public procurement in Europe. Japanese developed their approaches and developed an act back in about 2003. So green public procurement has appeared again under ESPR, and there is discussion going on around rules for different product categories, looking at different performance levels for green public procurement, i.e. by public procurers, and the application of a life cycle approach. However, we've not found any specific details yet about that provide more detail on this. It may well impact on the sector if it progresses, for example, in things like workwear and these sorts of topics, overalls, etc. That public authorities may buy for staff. Substances of concern. Again, quite a broad area. There seems to be quite significant links to separate regulations on this, and the specific differences between the substance of concern that are highlighted in the ESPR, that perhaps are different from other chemicals regulations, perhaps will become clearer as we move on. I think a couple of the key things we've pulled out, that substances that negatively affect the reuse of recycling of materials in a product are going to be considered within anything that goes forward in this particular element of ESPR. And the legal obligations related to substance of concern will be set out in delegated acts, for example, in textiles, but no final delegated acts have been adopted yet, of course, so we don't know what those may be. So they may well be integrated into the specific regulations like DPP, but this is still, we're awaiting clarification on this. I won't go through what is REACH and the revision, but there are linkages to existing regulations there. And this is true, of other regulations. There are sort of almost dotted line linkages to other regulations that are referred to. So the various green claims legislation, the EAPR that's going to come in, but so one needs to keep a broader eye on the regulatory developments. So product environmental footprint is another area where there's a very active group that have developed category rules for clothing, and indeed this voluntary methodology may well be aligned to ESPR, and indeed, as I say, category rules have been set up for apparel and footwear. There are some criticisms of it. But and it's not quite clear, and this is something we're exploring further at the moment, how this may be linked to the ESPR product regulations. But this may be suggested as one of the mechanisms to assess, for example, eco-design / life cycle requirements of textile products. But that's still a little bit unclear at the moment. So some key implications for the sector. And again, I'm just going to run through this very quickly, particularly for SMEs and also for larger companies. If you want to get ahead of the curve, start thinking about how you may embed perhaps durability, repairability, etc. A lot of the R's into your design and development processes or your specifications for suppliers, in supply countries. Make sure that you are following the activities, because there are a lot of activities. It's not easy to follow them. Again, hopefully this is our added value. We will be providing updated webinars on the topics, and again, as new information emerges, we will be incorporating that into our work. So again, evaluate the second area is to evaluate your product circularity data. Start to open conversations maybe with your suppliers around the possible areas that may emerge in the regulations, fiber composition, for example, the extent to which repairability is being considered, the awareness of will you need to start to think about training your suppliers or suggesting your suppliers set up their own training. Start to collect data on unsold return stock, for example. Green public procurement, again, audit suppliers, conduct some form of life cycle review, analyses. And again, building into that sort of data collection that touches a lot of these areas, also start to track substances of concern. So a couple of the very specific areas that we would suggest any SMEs or perhaps companies that are newer to this area. make regulations, a standing board item. The new green regulations, a topic that is of board level conversation. Allocate regulation and policy monitoring to someone within the team. If you're a small organization, maybe allocate that to maybe 0.5 of your quality person if you don't have a full-time sustainability manager, but make sure you've got somebody following what's going on. Develop an outline plan to follow the different timelines, and start to think about how the issues are going to going to impact on different parts of the business. So, strategic planning, thinking to the future, design, procurement, supply chain, logistics. And start to think about how you might start to engage with the suppliers on these issues. We're going to go very quickly go through standards that exist in this area, because what we've picked up is there is different perspectives on the term standards in the sector. We have heard many people thinking that standards are voluntary agreements or they're tools and checklists, but from the perspective of our presentation, we're talking more about international standards, European standards, and national standards. So again, because we'll share the link with you after the event, I'm not going to read through these different slides, but there are already a series of standards out there that effectively, although they might not be called circularity standards, they're covering different elements that are relevant to circularity. And particularly now, the core group in CEN that is really starting to focus in around these issues is the CEN TC 248. And within CEN TC 248 Working Group 39, there is a specific focus on circular economy in textiles products in the textile chain. This group was set up 5 years ago, is very active. They have over 200 members, and they're really working on a series of different standards that are in development. So notably one that I've reviewed on design for circularity is very practical, very useful, written from the point of view of those in design and development in the sector. Of particular note, we only learnt about this a couple of days ago in conversation with Dutch colleagues, is there is specific standards that are in development looking at the physical durability requirements that are starting. And again, this may be, this is just my personal view, and is not any sort of recommendation, but there may be, given that the Commission has stated in the Circular Economy Action Plan number 2 that they really are focusing on starting to really work on fast fashion. The whole area of durability and longevity, lifespans of products, issues to do with importation of cheaper products that perhaps fall apart under in a relatively short timescale is an area of action. So durability, which is a very nuanced term, is perhaps very interesting to see that there are 3 standards starting in the area. There are also national standards. So this is just a UK example, but we have a very international audience to this discussion. So you may well have other national standards going on. And again, I'll go through very briefly on this as well. There are also international European standardization and national standardization happening that is not just focused on the textile sector, but may well have implications for the textile sector. There's a suite of about six onward standards that have been published by ISO last year that cover different elements of circularity from a sort of organizational, particularly from an organizational point of view. Those standards have been passed what we now have is that two of the core standards, 004 and 0010, are now moving into revision. And those standards will, and different working groups are being set up to take forward those published standards with a view to that process concluding in 2028. So there are standards out there. We'll talk about more about this at the next webinar, but there is a reason why the revision process is starting, and that will be concluded in 2028. There are new standards that are moving into various stages of proposal and development. So there's one on extended producer responsibility. There's one on value chains. There's a separate one on case studies, and also there's one around management systems and circularity. In the UK, without blowing the UK's trumpet too much in an international audience, we launched the first British standard in 2000, or the first standard and the national standard in the world on integrating circularity aspects into organizations. And there is, this was much more business focused standard, and there are discussions about potentially revising and updating that standard as we speak. There is now also a European Circular Economy Technical Committee, again, that is focused on different standards, as we see that here, building on some of the existing areas within the ISO standards, but also looking at information sharing. It's called information sharing to learn some of the lessons around data sharing in value chains before DPP comes in. There may be a standard in the future on DPP, but the decision was it was too early to start something specifically, because again, we don't know what is going to be in the DPP, and that will be different potentially for different product regulations. There is also standards, a working group starting development around EPR and remanufacturing. The other key elements before finishing is another area to be aware of, again, if you're really interested in this area, is JCT10. It should be a technical committee within CEN-elect. And this was a set of standards related to materials efficiency, originally of energy-related products. But effectively, the Commission under the ESPR have now broadened this group to be looking at the standards to go broader than energy-related products. So the key point here is that already there are published standards around repair, durability, etc. Although those have been initially geared and were published back in 2020 and 2019 around energy-related products, these standards, as I understand it, are being revised to be much more broader in scope. And I know already that some in the textile sector have taken some of these standards and have tried to adjust the guidance for their own sector. One of the standards that is missing from that is a new standard around circular design that was published in November last year, that builds on existing work that, it has been published also separately. No time to go into this today, but there is links to textiles. There's been separate, quite active standardization that links to eco-design around fishing gear that of course includes a lot of polymeric textiles. So circular design standard effectively is looking at how you do eco-design or more specifically circular design at a design and development level. Again, it's a published standard, as I mentioned. And just in closing now, the other key things to be aware of on this agenda and why is this important, these standards may be very helpful, particularly when we get further down the line about thinking about eco-design requirements for textiles regulations. There is already an ISO IEC standard around environmentally conscious design at a design and development level. And there is a standard covering how you bring eco-design, more broadly into environmental management systems and quality management systems such as 14001 and 9000. So I know a little bit about those two standards, as I was a UK expert to the first one and I chaired the second one. So these, whilst broader than circular design, are potentially very useful. So I know that was very fast. I don't know, Sarah, if you're on the call, if you just wanted to make, so Sarah heads up net zero and circular economy for British standards. I don't know, Sarah, if you are on the call, if you wanted to make any comments on this, because unfortunately I can't see the screen.
You can't see me because there are thousands of people, but I can speak because I've unmuted myself. But thank you. I have put my camera on in case anybody can see me. I'm waving. I think you did an incredibly good job there of cantering through what is an incredibly vast program of standards in this area, looking at circular and specifically, of course, looking at the work that's going on in the for textiles, specifically, because it's the textiles agenda, the textiles sector is obviously extremely important in the for the Circular Economy Act and for the EU. It's one of their key sectors. It's also, of course, in the UK. It's one of our it's one of the sectors that has been highlighted by our Environment Ministry to really consider when we're thinking about bringing in circular practices. So alongside things like, the same sort of areas as in Europe, so construction and transport mobility and electrical items and things like that. So I think that the important thing to be aware of when it comes to the standards is not to feel overwhelmed by them, because the key thing is, in your nations you will have the opportunity to speak to your national standards body about how to input into the work that's going on around these developing standards and the revisions to standards, and that applies whether it's an international or a European standard as covered by Martin. So I think you just need to be able to say, go to your association, your professional body in your country, and speak to your national committee, your national standards body, which should have a committee. And if it doesn't, then maybe it's something that you want to discuss with them, being able to start so that you can provide significant input into the development of that work as it goes forward, because that is how the system incorporates all of the views of interested stakeholders like yourselves, and that's, I think, a point I just wanted to really kind of bring home, because those standards will be they will be developed with your input in mind. So that's something to be clear about, and to realise that they will all align and they won't contradict one another in any sense, even though it seems like there are a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. And I didn't see any questions in the chat, and that's probably because you're all listening in a very detailed manner, writing lots of notes, maybe.
There is hi, Martin. There is actually some questions.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I try to answer some of them because with time we will not have time, but there is some that I kept. So there is two we can briefly discuss before.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
So there was it's just I on my system I can't see any. So obviously that you can. So that's great. So I'll shut up. Over to you.
Okay, so there is one question that is related a bit to the standards. Also, Sarah can answer, or you. It's is there a current certifying body that is leading the way, or will likely come out with a certification or label that will make it easier for brands to signal to customers how circular their products are?
I can have a start on that, Sarah. No is the answer. I think what we've recently seen is a consultation by the Commission, as I highlighted, that was just recently concluded, where they were looking at a potential much broader label to include various circularity aspects. I know always people are, particularly in the supply chain, looking for the nirvana. Unfortunately, the nirvana doesn't exist at the moment. There may be, I mean, I'm speculating here, so I'm speculating. There may be additional information requirements linked to the product regulation. The other elements that one will have to consider is that the green claims legislation that was published last year that highlighted effectively what you can and cannot say in relation to green claims might well be something that you'd have to consider in relation to any requirements that you pass down to particularly suppliers. So I don't know, Sarah, if you had anything to add to that.
Not at the moment. I think that the certification is something that is usually based on, I mean, requirement standards usually form the basis of schemes that certification bodies independently can build and run around those standards. And what's good about common standards is that they provide a really consistent and reliable basis for that to be interoperable across different jurisdictions, and also be recognized by different bodies and different areas as well, so that there is a commonality there, because it's based on that standard. The scheme itself is based on one standard. So at the moment, I mean, I don't know the situation with the different schemes that pertain. Sometimes schemes are very much based on what's being required by the industry themselves, and but verification is something in this area that hasn't begun, because there aren't, we don't have standards that have been put in place around things like the DPP or the sustainable product regulation.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah's just reminded me of perhaps a couple of points. Is most of the circularity, let's say the broader circularity regulation, is organizational guidance. So it's the level of the organization and the business unit. It's not at a product level. I think the other key thing that is perhaps going to emerge is, of course, for example, if the products regulation, and I'm speculating here, so this is not advice or certainty or anything, is that if, for example, the textiles regulation, for example, chose to include durability, repairability, as it's claimed to be a horizontal standard, and maybe recycled content as key product requirements, there may well need to be testing systems in place to test against those objectives. So that might be, and again, this is discussion, maybe there's a test to say that the product will need to be able to exist in the state that it is launched in, the shirt or clothing, for 1 year, for example. And there are various tests that can be used to maybe technical tests to do that, similarly on repairability. So I think this whole area of the sort of testing to show how you comply with the regulations, either test in-house or through third-party laboratories, may well be something that will maybe emerge into the future. From a conversation that we had the other day, it appeared that there are already a number of tests that are out there that are already done, but they wouldn't have necessarily been linked to circularity. There might be something like an abrasion test or something, but they may be very relevant, for example, to come under durability. So that was something we picked up in a conversation the other day. Anyway, any other key points or questions?
We can just have one last question that was more about DPP. So someone was asking if there is any rules that we know or regulation on what should be done, for example, when there is a t-shirt or shirt that comes from recycling, where does this DPP fit in term on post-consumer waste?
Again, the answer is no, because the regulation has yet to be specifically announced. The best you can do at the moment, is to read the text in the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation and to follow webinars like, for example, we're running, like BSI are running, to also link to your relevant trade associations, such as in the UK, we have UK Fashion and Textiles Trade Association, but you will have your own different trade associations, and to follow what Eurotext is doing. So as a major trade association in Europe. So it is not, there isn't guidance that we're aware of at that level of detail. And again, I will repeat again, because there's a big ongoing major misconception of this. EC digital product passport regulations, i.e. what will go into DPP, have not been announced yet.
And just to follow up with what Martin said, I see my colleague Joy Tan is on the call as well. Is on the webinar, and she's the senior standards manager looking at the area of digital. So she oversees the work of the standards development in the area that you mentioned, the e-commerce place with around the data architecture of what might be in place for DPPs in the future, and we are running in BSI a sort of ongoing update webinars to address some of the issues around what is known and what isn't known yet about the development of the standards to support regulation in that area.
And again, Sarah just reminded me again that again, as I mentioned earlier, in the ESPR working group or working plan, which is a European document, it does state that the DPP, legislative requirements will either be aligned to different product-specific regulations, so it will be incorporated, for example, in the textiles regulation or the steel regulation, or there may be separate accompanying regulations. So again, they will be aligned, and the implication from the information we have is the DPP will be aligned to the different regulations, and so it's important to keep an eye on both topics, if you see what I mean. And if you really want to keep an eye on it, there's a separate batteries DPP regulation that is going on that is slated to be passed before the ESPR product regulation. So that is also another, if you're really concerned or you really want to get on top of that, to also follow what's going on in that product category for the sort of generic lessons learned. So unless there's any other burning questions?
No, I think we managed to answer all of them. I'm checking briefly now. There's some interesting links and information some people shared, but I think all the questions have been answered. Yeah.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, thank you very much indeed for your attention. And as I say, there's something weird with my screen, so I couldn't see anybody at anybody until I pressed another button, but I saw when I came off there was 94 people were still on the call, but it looks like we've got people constantly joining and dropping out, so maybe we had over 100 to the call, so that's good. And as I said, we had a significant interest, so obviously it is an area of interest. We do have and will be running a series of webinars around different topics. We will have further ones on DPP and the in effect the amendments to the Waste Framework Directive that's bringing in EPR for textiles, and then next year and the following 2 years of the project we will repeat these with updated information, because we know there will be different people coming into this at different stages. And we'll be collaborating with BSI as a representative of the international standards community on this, and great to be collaborating there. And so this is a very fast-moving and active area. It is quite difficult to track precisely what is going on. So fortunately, that is part of our project role in the Just Fashion project that I mentioned before. So keep an eye on what we're doing, and go and have a look at the Just Fashion project to find out more about what else is going on in that project. And also, if you're in the UK, also have a look at the BSI website for all the activities that are going on in BSI. And keep your eyes open for potential new developments in the future. So I'll stop, waffling on here, as we say in English, and thank you very much for your attention. And again, we will circulate a link in due course to all of those who attended. And if you have if there is any key information you think that you had more up-to-date information from a regulatory point of view or a standards point of view, please let us know. Sadly, we've got a small team, so we're not able to process information on tools and techniques and things like that. But if you really got very specific regulatory or standards activity, either in your own country or other things that you may be aware of that's going on in the European process, please drop us a line. I think you've got our colleague Roz's email. So if you send it to Roz, and then she can forward that to us. So I'd like to thank Sarah, Virginia, and Lillian for their various tasks and making sure that the event happened on to plan. And thank you very much for your time, and see you at another webinar. Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.